People a lot of times they'll say Americans are so dumb. And of course, like if you've got 10 smart Americans on the street corner, the news reporter is going to skip all of them, find the dumbest one they can find, and interview the dumbest one. And the same thing with game shows and stuff like that. You'll see these people on these game shows and they'll be like, "Where's Iran on a map?" And they'll point to the Ukraine or Japan or some nonsense. But I do think that Americans are smarter than they're given credit for. And then the media kind of hides that. But I think that the Jewish education in America has really hurt Americans. And a lot of Americans cannot critically think. They've been trained to hear a piece of information, remember it for a week for the test, and just repeat. If an authority tells it to you, it's true. If you've got the right credentials, you're trusted. This sort of nonsense, right? So, like, let's say, okay, that 99% of a certain group of people were doing a certain thing. If you were to say, those people do this, what's the American going to say? They're going to say, but what about the one that doesn't? As if the one that doesn't means that there's no correlation between that behavior and that group of people. You know, there's certain things that are common to men and certain things that are common to women. Every man that has ever been in a relationship with a woman will have certain conversations that are just common. Like this happens to all kind of men, right? Let's say a vehicle breaks down the road, right? Let's say it's nighttime. Let's say that there's mosquitoes and everything already out biting people. And let's say that this woman has no idea how to help you fix the car whatsoever. And you don't need her help whatsoever. And you could actually get it done and be back faster if she wasn't even there, right? And you know, if you bring her, she's going to be distracting you the whole time with complaining. She's going to be like, I'm hungry. The mosquitoes are biting. It's hot out here. How long is this going to take? Right? But you'll still want to go. You know, she'll be like, do you want me to go? And you're thinking, no, I don't. You won't be useful for fixing it and you'll be in the way. I don't want you to go. I just want to go do it. But you'll think, I can't tell her that. That'll hurt her feelings and she'll be upset. I can't say, no, I don't want you to go. She'll be like, do you want me to come with you? You'll be like, well, I can do it. It won't take very long. I'll be back. But she's going to insist that she go. And then she's going to go and complain, right? Well, a lot of men have had that same thing happen to them. You know, they knew the woman wasn't going to want to go. The woman wanted to go with them. The woman went with them, and then the woman complained. They already know it. They already know what's going to happen before it happens because that's just female nature. They don't want you to go if you go somewhere, they're going to want to go too. One, to just make sure you're going where you say you're going to go. And then that's not a good example. I got to be able to think of a better example than that. But you know, every man's been with a woman and the woman say, I don't care what you do. I don't care if you go. And then you think, oh, she said she doesn't care if I go on this fishing trip with my friends. And then you're like, okay, well then I'm going to go. And then she gets mad. Because she wasn't telling the truth. She didn't mean it's okay if you go. She just wanted to get the credit as if she didn't care, even though she did care. And she wanted you to be like, oh, I sense that she doesn't really want me to go. I'm not going to go. You know what I'm saying? Every man that's ever been in a relationship with a woman's dealt with a double bind. Where it doesn't matter, the question is phrased in such of a way where both answers are wrong. These are just common things that women do that any man that deals with women knows and deals with. A woman's going to do these things, right? But in America, if you say, well, women do this, they'll be like, well, not all women. You know what I'm saying? This has paralyzed the ability to think critically. Americans have been raised that all generalizations are bad. All classifications or categorizations of people is bad. You're not allowed to generalize. You're not allowed to stereotype. You're not allowed to see patterns. You're not allowed to say, you're not allowed to call a spade a spade. And this training, and this happens from the time you're 5 and go to school. The Americans are trained because they want us to be a melting pot. They want to bring all kind of opposites together. They're trained not to see what they see. They're trained not to hear what they hear, and you've got to be able to make generalizations. You could never even have a conversation if you didn't have generalizations. If you had to stop and give an exception every single time, you could never even speak. Like if I say the sky is blue, an American will say, well, not at nighttime. I'm like, well, I mean, the sky's blue right now. They'll be like, well, it's not always blue. Sometimes it's pink. You know what I'm saying? So if it's like, more women vote Democrat than Republican. And if you say most women vote Democrat, some woman will say, well, I vote Republican. Like it even matters, And if there's a group of women and you say, women generally are shorter than men, there might be this one woman that's really tall and she'll say, well, I'm tall. Women, it's typical for women to personalize everything and how they emotionally feel about it. They always come from how it affects them or their personal experience. So like if there's this woman, right? And she like if she had a personal experience that is exceptional, that's not okay, so in the event of a divorce, most all of the time, the woman gets the custody of the children, not the men. And if you say that, and there's this woman that didn't get custody, she's going to act like that's not true. She's going to be like, well, I didn't. They're going to argue from their personal experience. They're going to argue from how they feel personally about it and their own emotions. And some women aren't this way, but most women are that way. And there's certain things that you can say it. You can make certain generalizations about men or about women or about whites or about blacks or about Muslims or about Christians or about Jews. There's generalizations that are true. There's stereotypes that form out of the basis of truth. They come about because of truths. But people are trained to not be able to think that way. They're trained to not, and it's because, so if you look, if you just look at the data, you could say, well, in England, in London, you're more likely to get raped by someone from Bangladesh or Pakistan than someone from London, like really British or really German. And that's true. White people rape at lower rates than African Americans. That's true. But you're not allowed to say it. And if someone does say it, they're like, well, I've got 2 black friends that have never raped anybody in their life. But it doesn't make what I just said before not true. It is true that the violent crime rate is higher among blacks than whites. But that doesn't mean that every single black person is a violent criminal. And by saying that the rate is higher, you're not saying that every single one is a violent criminal. But you can't even look at the truth of the situation when everybody's trained not to make any generalizations and to always point out the exceptions. It's insane. And so, but people like me, we're not afraid of being called a name. We're not afraid of being a social outcast. We don't have to fit in. There's certain people that just don't really feel the social pressure as strong as other people. So even though all my life that's how I've been trained to be, I'm not that way. I've always been a critical thinker. I've always been able to question things. I've always wanted my beliefs to be like I've always wanted a basis for what I believe. I never believed all the silly, stupid superstitions that were told to me growing up because they just didn't make sense. Off of face value, they didn't make sense. So I wanted some evidence to back up the claim that it's unlucky to break a mirror, and there was none. There's no evidence for it, so I didn't believe it. You know, I didn't have no reason to believe it. And so some people, it doesn't matter how much data comes in, they'll ignore the data and they'll just say, well, the data is racist. There's some conspiracy to give false data. There's some conspiracy, or they just won't accept it when it's the facts. It's like, it doesn't matter how many times we do IQ tests across all the nations of the world, they're still not going to believe the truth about IQ. It doesn't matter how we look at, if we look at the crime stats, they're never going to believe it. They're just going to say, well, there must be some kind of other explanation. And it really is apparent that some things are because of culture and because of the breed of human, the race itself. Because they'll try to find other excuses. They'll say, well, it's because they're poor. Well, that doesn't explain why poor white people don't have as high of a rape rate or a murder rate. You know, you cannot blame socioeconomic factors on the high rate of black violent crime, or the high rate of Muslim violent crime, or the high rate of Pakistani incest. You know, there's things that are true about certain groups of people. And then if you even point out those differences, they say, well, you're bad, right? So right now what's going on is there's a whole bunch of degenerates that call themselves Muslims. I'm not saying every Muslim's a degenerate, but there are a bunch of degenerates that call themselves Muslims that form rape gangs and group rape women. That's degenerate. That's bad. That's evil. There's nothing good or redeeming about it. And a whole bunch of them have been purposely put in Europe to change the breed of Europe, to wipe out Europe. It's a planned attack. Like right now in America, if there's a neighborhood that's majority white and you're not white, let's say you're a Mexican or an Indian or an African American or an Arab, and you know how to apply for it, you can apply for a rent subsidy to live in that white neighborhood where the government will pay the lion's share of your rent if you will move into a white neighborhood. Well, why would the government do that? Why would the government make all these incentives to make there not be any majority white neighborhoods? Why would they do that? Now, some people might say, well, they're just trying to give these other people a fair shot at, or whatever. But there's nothing fair about taking tax money to pay somebody's rent. You know, nobody's paying my rent. Before they ever even started doing it, the Jews were talking about that they were going to do it. And the Jews was telling why they were going to do it. The Jews are saying that the white race is a warrior race that needs to be destroyed. That the white race is Amalek and must be destroyed. And they would brag about that they're going to breed us out. That all our grandchildren will be brown. That there won't be any more white people. And the expectation is that white people will be afraid to be called a racist. They'll be afraid to generalize. They'll be afraid to see patterns. They'll be afraid to judge. This is the real like biggest weapon here is training the American. You're not allowed to judge. You're not allowed to think critically. You're not allowed to judge. Saying that you're not allowed to judge is the same as saying you're not allowed to think. You're not allowed to critically think about anything. You're not allowed to have any standards. Universal tolerance and universal acceptance means you're not allowed to have any virtues. You're not allowed to have any values. You know, you're supposed to think that a monogamous relationship with no cheating, with two people having kids that are biologically both people's kids, you're supposed to think that that's just as good as two homosexuals adopting a child to molest. You're supposed to think, no judge, don't judge nobody. It's brain rot. And it's not true Christianity either. This new type of Christianity, this I tolerate, I accept everything, Jesus wasn't that way. Jesus called people Pharisees. Or he called Pharisees liars and hypocrites. He cleared a temple with a whip. Now, he was mostly peaceful, but he had not renounced the use of force. He would use force. He wouldn't tolerate anything and everything. He wouldn't tolerate a house of prayer being turned into a marketplace. Little bit. What you doing with my shoe? That's my shoe. Come here. You know that ain't your shoe. You know that ain't your shoe. Oh, here on. He done turned up. There you go. There you go. I bet y'all don't like that, do y'all? I feel bad for the Arabs and Jews. You know, because they hate dogs so much. And they really miss out. Because a dog's a pretty good animal, really. People want to hear the more positive messages and see the nature and stuff. They don't really want to hear me on and on about this. But I'm going to be honest. I miss my haters. And I'm looking for them right now. I don't know why. Most of the time I like the positive comments. But I don't know. Sometimes I just like to, you know, sometimes I just kind of, I don't know. Maybe I just want to be hated on by my haters. Because right now England has changed the law where if an American posts, even if it's before you even go to England, like things that I've posted on social media here in America, if I go to England, they'll arrest me. They'll arrest you for causing people anxiety. Can you believe this? So, like, let's say someone's just an absolute coward that's afraid of their shadow. And you say anything to them, and now they feel anxious. Like, you don't even have to threaten them. You can just be like, you saying that you don't feel comfortable being made a minority in your own country, that's made these Muslims feel uncomfortable, so we're going to arrest you. It's insane. The British government is guilty of treason against the British people. The British government has no legitimacy for the exact same reasons that the Americans spoke of in the Declaration of Independence of why Britain wasn't a legitimate government over them. The British citizens could say the same about their own government. The British government is not a legitimate government. They've placed their own people outside of their protection. They've brought in foreigners to oppress them, to loot them, to replace them. When their own citizens are being raped and molested, they do not protect them. They do not give them justice. They punish them. They punish the rapist for saying, my rapist was a Muslim. It's insane. And we cannot just let England fall like this. We need to supply the British people with guns and let them overthrow their government. We need regime change in Britain. Hell, they'll already arrest me for things that I've said, so let me just say what I've said and say more. The Queen of England is guilty of treason, and so is King Charles. Both Queen Elizabeth and Charles deserve to be beheaded for treason, for what they've done to the British people. It is absolutely repugnant. It is horrible. And y'all can think that that smiling old lady was sweet or good or British, but she absolutely betrayed the British people every step of the way. If it was a choice between India and the British people, she picked India. If it was a choice between Africa and the British people, she picked Africa. If it's a choice between rape gangs and the British people, she chose the rape gangs. She constantly worked to lose all of Britain to the Muslims. And while she was supposedly over the Church of England, which no woman has any authority over the Church of England, according to the Bible itself, women cannot be the heads of churches. But she was supposed to be the head of the Church of England, and she allowed there to be Sharia law parallel courts in Britain. Treachery and treason. Y'all should have cut the head off that old treasonous evil witch. You should have killed her because she's killing y'all. She murdered your nation. It's really crazy. I really wish, and I mean this with all of my heart, I really wish that during World War II, America would have fought the Bolsheviks. That's who we should have fought. We should have teamed up with Hitler and defeated the Soviet Union and freed the Russian people from their Jewish communist oppressors. We should have freed the Russians from the communist Jews. And I'm not saying that the Nazis were good or we should have maintained an alliance with them, but they were not as destructive and they were not as big of a problem as the Bolshevik Jews. We should have probably just left Hitler alone and just seen what happened. But we definitely should not have teamed up with the Bolsheviks. We should not have teamed up with the Rothschilds. We shouldn't have even really been in the First World War. We should have let Germany defeat England in World War I. And then when World War II happened, we should have went against the Soviets. We should have freed the Russians from the atheistic, communist, Jewish Bolsheviks. We should have freed our own press from them. We should have let McCarthy go after the communists. It was a mistake to hold McCarthy back. Every time he was finding secret communists in America, he knew there was a communist conspiracy to take over American media and education. But every time McCarthy would find a treasonous communist in the ranks, he'd be a Jew. And then be like, we got to stop McCarthy. He's just anti-Semite. He's just going after the Jews. Well, it was the Jews that were doing it. That's why. So anyway. Maybe, after I've had my cigarette, I will get off this these rants. And why should I care of England when England doesn't care about England? But I do. I don't even know why I do. It's a really weird thing that we Americans do. We were oppressed by the crown. We gained independence from England, and then we decided we'll fight any war they're our greatest ally, and we'll go to war for them all the time. I don't understand it, if we were the Dutch give us loans, the French helped us with their navy and trained our troops. So why do we always side with England? Why do we always do England's bidding, But we used to. I don't know. I guess we just so wanted to be liked by England. Maybe we looked up to them because they were powerful and had an empire. But World War I is this big old mess where we're the bad guys. Germany and Austria have a mutual protection pact because there's the threat of Russia. So Austria says, if you get attacked by Russia, Germany, we'll help you. And Germany says, Austria, if you get attacked by Russia, we'll help you. Okay, fine. No problem there. Then Russia and Austria are like, look at all these Christian little tiny nations in the Balkans that have recently gained their independence from the Turks. And they both wanted them. They both wanted that area. Well, Serbia is part of the Austrian Empire. Some Serbian assassinates the crown prince. Now, they've given this area a lot of autonomy and let them make their own laws, but what do they get for that? Their crown prince gets assassinated. So they put troops in the area and they take more direct control of the area. That makes sense. I don't blame. Why would we blame them for that? Now, maybe you could argue that they should have given the Serbians their independence or whatever, but the Serbians did assassinate their crown prince. So, okay, so now what happens? Russia says, we're backing Serbian independence, not because they cared about Serbian independence. They cared about weakening Austria because they wanted the Balkans. Because Russia has some of the people in Russia from a long time ago fled Constantinople when it fell to the Muslims and became and they've got this like 1,000-year-old, like, I don't know if it's really 1,000-year-old, but like this dream of retaking Constantinople. So the Russians, they want to move into the area and they want to make Austria weak. And they're both being dumb because look, we've got the Chinese, we've got the Muslims, there's so many India, there's so many other people in the world. Why are white people killing their own cousins and fighting their own brothers? It doesn't really make sense, but it's just greed. And so Russia attacks Austria. Germany, being honorable, just doing the decent thing, they made a promise with their mutual protection pact. They said, well, if Russia attacks you, we'll defend you. So they did. So Germany enters the war against Russia because Russia attacked Austria. Germany's done nothing wrong here. What has Germany done wrong except honor their word? Well, Britain is the bad guy here, which they often are. Britain is the bad guy. And Britain's like, hey, I want these little islands that Germany has. And they're busy with a war. I can attack them while they're being attacked. I'm going to kick them while they're down. And I don't remember if it was France or Italy. There's another country that said the same thing. They wanted some islands in the Mediterranean. They worked out a deal. So they decided to team up and just attack Germany. They're the bad guy. They're the aggressor. They haven't been attacked. They probably should have allied with Germany and helped Germany against Russia. But the thing is, the British are afraid with Prussia and, that high civilization there. They're afraid of the Germans getting a navy and taking away what the British have as an edge. They have a powerful navy. And so they want to keep Germany weak. And so... and they lust for these little islands in the Mediterranean and around Japan. So they attack. They think they're just going to steamroll over Germany. Germany invents these high-tech submarines and is defeating England. And England's whooped. Like they deserve. They shouldn't have been, they shouldn't have been the bad guy. They shouldn't have got into something that was none of their business and whatever. So the Jews, Rothschilds, they come to England and they say, listen, we control America through their press. We control their bank, academia, everything. We'll get America to enter the war if you will give us Palestine. If you'll take Palestine from the Turks, give us Palestine, we'll get America to enter the war on your behalf. So, and this is what I'm saying as an American. America should have never fought in World War I on the side of England. We did just because of, I guess, common blood. We said a lot of us are descendants of the British. We're going to side with the British. But the British were in the wrong. We should have said, that's none of our business. Well, actually, that's what most Americans said. They said, we're going to vote for the guy who keeps us out of war, right? So the guy that was said, no war, I'm going to keep us out. I promise I'll keep you out of World War I. That's who people voted for. And then as soon as he gets in, he's doing everything he can to get involved in the war. Because he's the chief of the executive branch. That will make him more powerful and be able to do more stuff. So we wind up entering the war. Germany puts these all these ads out and all these telegrams all over America saying, don't get on that boat. It's armed. We're going to sink it. It's bringing ammunition to the British. It's an armed warship disguised as a private ship. We know what it's doing. And they warned us not to get on the boat. Americans get on the boat anyway, because shit, ain't nobody going to tell us what to do. And they sink it. Because they should have sunk it. Because it was bringing in military supplies into Britain, right? They sink the boat. They warned us not to get on the boat. And then what did all the Jewish newspapers tell all the Americans? Germany is brutal and barbaric. They're attacking these innocent civilians for no reason. Why would they do such a horrible thing? Then the Americans are pissed. Oh, you touched our boats? You killed civilians? And we enter the war, and Germany gets defeated. And that's a problem. Because the Jews still control our media, the Jews still control our bank. Now the American government is in debt. It's going bankrupt. So it takes out a bunch of loans. It says, Rothschild, loan us a bunch of money. So now we're even worse off than we were before. What did America get out of entering World War One? What? I guess we beat up on Germany really bad. And then think about this. Germany, I'm talking about World War One. I'm not talking about World War Two. They're not Nazis. That don't exist yet. Don't think of the German people as being Nazis. They're an honorable people that's honored their mutual protection pact with Austria. Everybody ganged up on them and attacked them unjustly. And now they've lost the war because America come in from nowhere and sent all these people. A lot of Americans were Germans. They had to go get some Germans to defeat the Germans. And now they're like, the world's like, Germany, it's all your fault. How is it Germany's fault? It's Germany's fault. You have to pay to rebuild Europe from everything that got destroyed from World War One. Everything's your fault. Tell me, how in the hell is it Germany's fault? Why did we blame Germany? Because they was whooping our ass so bad? Because they had their submarines around England? Because of what? In no kind of way can you rationally say that World War One was Germany's fault. It's just people were mad at Germany because the Germans were whooping up on them so bad. And so they want to punish Germany. But what happened before this? Before World War One? What? The Jews already wrote books talking about how Germans were Amalek that needed to be destroyed. The Jews already wrote about how they were going to take over Europe and rule it from its heart in Germany. They already planned this. Jews are already in positions of government in Germany at World War I, and they agree to all these terms to completely gut Germany. But remember, they already said they were going to rule Europe from the heart of Germany before this thing even happened. They already said they were going to take Palestine. You know, they already planned to do this in World War One. And even so, they already talked about the World War One and World War II and World War III before World War One. The Masons were already planning all this out. The Jews were already planning this out. The purpose of World War One. The Turks don't want to give the Zionists Palestine. They won't do it for any amount of money. You got to give the Muslims credit here that they stood on principle, that they said no amount of money would they do it. So they can't bribe them. England's in a different position. England's like, you get America to enter the war and we'll give you Palestine. It's not theirs to give, but they're like, yeah, we'll take it from the Turks. The Turks didn't want to do business with the Jews. The Turks had honor, which, I mean, dang, that's saying the Turks had done a lot of terrible things. But the leader of the Turks at that time was an honorable man, or at least he had some values about him. And they're just not going to do it. So the purpose of World War I is to give the Jews Palestine. The purpose of World War II was to make the Jews want to go to Palestine. What's the purpose of World War III? Albert Pike already told us about World War I, World War II, and World War III. The purpose of World War III, he says the plan is, well, one, they want to make greater Israel from the Nile River to the Euphrates River. That's why the 7 different countries have been attacked by America, and Jewish Rothschild banks have been put in these 7 nations, talking about, Somalia, Sudan, Egypt, Syria, Iraq, Afghanistan. Why are all these in Iran? Why is every nation that gets attacked, they get a Rothschild Jewish central bank? And it weakens all the nations around Israel so that Israel can expand and take from the Nile River to the Euphrates. That's their dream. That's what they want to do. They say it. Now, I remember when we were saying this 15, 16 years ago, and they were saying that's a crazy conspiracy theory. Now, the Jews get on the news and straight up tell you. Benjamin Netanyahu even puts it on a map and says, hey, this is the Greater Israel Project. So it's like, we've been telling the truth the whole time. The media, everybody, they've been calling my type of people. They've been saying that we're the bad guys, that we're the racists, that we're the... Actually, it's the Jews that are the most racist people on earth. Actually, it's them that want the war. I want peace and trade. Like, people like Jared Taylor never advocated for any nation to be destroyed. He wanted Japan for the Japanese, Mexico for the Mexicans. Everybody should be able to have a homeland. Everybody should just be at peace and trade with each other. I don't want war. I don't want to go to war. I don't want to kill people. I don't want people crying. I don't want buildings being blown up. That's not good for business. But the Jews do want war. And they said, I'm telling you, the protocols of the learned elders of Zion is legit their plan. They have not deviated from the plan. It matches history. They said that they were going to overthrow the czars and bring in communism in Russia before they done it. They said they were going to take Palestine before they done it. They said they were going to go off the gold standard before they done it. They said they were going to have centralized banking and centralized public schools before they done it. It plays out like history. You can see they had a plan to take over the world. They're following their plan to take over the world. When we notice them doing it, they say that we're lying when they know we're telling the truth, and then they keep doing it. And so you look at Palestine, and now I'm telling you, I'm not a Muslim. I don't agree with Muhammad, but I'm saying it's important to be concerned with what they do in Palestine because they will do that to the rest of the world too. It's not just Palestine that the Jews will treat this way. It says in the Talmud, the non-Jew doesn't have a soul. It also says in the Talmud that if a Jew tells a non-Jew what's in the Talmud, he's to be put to death. But in the reasoning in the Talmud is they say that if the non-Jew knew what the Jew believed and felt about him, that they would kill all the Jews, which that's not true. They misjudge us. They think that we are like they are. And this is the good news. I want to tell you this. You don't have to kill them. You don't have to enslave them. You don't have to do anything. None of that is necessary. You just have to know who they are and what they want to do. Because if you would just be good people, you love your neighbor, right? Just like Jesus said, right? You don't steal from your neighbor. You don't try to sleep with your neighbor's wife. If people are an honest and good, morally virtuous people, you cannot conquer a people like that. A people like that are courageous. A people like that have something worth fighting for. A people like that are honest and tell the truth, they're not deceived by lies very easily. And if you just build a community, if you were just looked out for each other, the Jews are they almost have no population. They're like less than 2% of the world. They would not be a threat. You could pretty much just let them have their corner of the world, let them believe that they're the superior race, and then just not be able to do anything about it. You could just don't trust them to give them control of your country's bank because you know that they believe that you're supposed to be their slave. They don't believe you have a soul. But you need to realize who they are. If you've got a group of people that believe that it's their moral duty to enslave the rest of the world, and they believe it's okay for them to enslave you, and they believe that you are their property, be aware of that and don't let them into your country. Don't give them political power. When you know that they're selling things, don't buy them. Don't give them money. When you know that the entertainment is propaganda, don't buy it. Don't watch it. So I'm not calling for violence. I'm just calling for awareness. And a lot of times, like when the Russian people fell to the Bolsheviks, they were afraid to stand up for the truth. The government would have all kind of propaganda telling all kind of lies that they knew weren't true. They were hungry, the crop yields were down, and the news would come on and say, we have the biggest crop yields ever of any country in the world. And they knew it was a lie, but they'd go along with it because they were afraid of being punished. You start to lose freedom when you start to be afraid to tell the truth. And I'm really worried because we have people pretending that they believe in the transgender bullshit. Like they know that man is not a woman, but they will pretend they do. And you've got people willing to argue and it's, you've got to have a certain amount of bravery and a certain willingness to just tell the truth. When everyone's willing to just play along with the lie, that's how these evil people are able to take power. The camera has a bad glare. Yeah, the sun is starting to set. The sun is in the west, and it's starting to. Thank you for telling me. I wouldn't even notice. I'll just come over here. Maybe where can I set the camera? I guess I'll just hold it. I could go outside. But, people will, as soon as I say because basically, you're going to, I don't know about you, but when I went to school, they taught us about the Holocaust in 3rd grade. They taught us about the Holocaust in 4th grade. Then they taught us about the Holocaust in 6th grade. And then they taught us about the Holocaust in 8th grade. Then they taught us about the Holocaust in 10th grade. Then they taught us about the Holocaust in 12th grade. And then when you go to college in your first history class, they teach you about the Holocaust again. It's just everywhere. It's just constant, And so because they have this ultimate victim card, anybody that says anything like, hey, have you noticed that they own all of the social media and all of the internet browsers and they own the media, people's mind immediately goes to, oh, that's what the Nazis said, so you're bad, so you're a Nazi, so you want to round up people and kill people. No. The thing is that the Nazis and the Zionists are almost the same thing and was back then. The Nazis was a reaction to the Zionist, to the Jew. The Jew believed that he was the superior race and everyone's supposed to be his slave. The Germans just inverted it. The Germans said, no, we're the superior race. You see what I'm saying? And the Jews were killing Christians. They killed 200 million Christians. 200 million. All across Eastern Europe and Russia. Starved them to death, crucified them, burned them in churches, killed them. Killed so many Prussians. Killed so many German speakers in Poland. And they were basically like, if you don't renounce your faith, we're going to kill you. You have to be an atheist. Except they made an exception for Jews. Jews could be Jews, but Christians couldn't be Christians. They had to be atheists, and they had to be communists, or they had to go and starve to death in a work camp till they died. And the Jews put hundreds of millions of people in concentration camps, but we're not really taught about that. We're just taught they took the blame for everything. They didn't do anything. They were innocent, and Hitler just used them as a scapegoat. But Hitler constantly kept going to the League of Nations and saying, hey, these communist Jews over here, they're killing all these Christians. Here's pictures, here's proof, here's evidence. Are you going to do something about it? They're killing all these Christians in Poland. They're killing all that part of Poland that used to be Germany that you took from us in World War I. Well, the Jews are killing all the German Christians there. Are you going to do anything about it? And he's like, look, I don't want war. Eventually, he sends an army in there to protect them from being slaughtered and genocided. And they're like, oh, you invaded Poland. Everybody declares war on them. But then when the Soviet Union conquers Poland, no one cares. No one says, Soviet Union, Russia, get out of Poland. You can't do that. Nobody all teams up and declares war on Russia. And that's because it was never about Poland. It was never about Poland. It was about destroying the rest of the kings that were left. And, the 2 cities in Japan that had the highest amount of Christians, do you know what those 2 cities were during World War II? Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The nuclear, because you think, why weren't the nukes dropped on Tokyo? Why were they dropped on these cities that didn't have so many people? Why were they dropped on these cities here? I mean, they had a lot of people, but not there were better military-rich targets. They purposely killed the most Christians they could possibly kill. And it's the same thing. Why didn't we do anything? Like the Christians, if you look after all of these wars we fought for the Jews and all these different countries surrounding Israel, All these different groups that America sent money to, ISIS, Al Qaeda, Taliban, they all killed Christians. Whoever was killing Christians got the money. The new regimes that come in, like in Syria, the leader of Syria, he protected Christians in all faiths and didn't allow forced conversions. What happened when he got removed from power? They killed all the Christians. They slaughtered them. So I'm coming back over here to where the glare is. I'll lean it up against the microwave, and then I can sit this way. I could sit down in a chair that's a little more comfortable and not. So, and you've got to remember that if you look at your textbooks, like let's say you go to college, you look at the textbooks, you look at the publisher, and you're like, oh, who's this guy? You go look it up. Who owns it? Who owns the textbooks you read? The Jews. I mean, almost every time. If it's not the Jews, it's a member of the Bavarian Illuminati or a Mason or a Jesuit, so it's still the Jews. They're the hierarchy of all that. So you're being, who won the war? The Jews won the war, and they tell the history of the war. They leave out all that they did, and they act like everything happened to them for no reason. They had so much blood on their hands. They murdered so many Christians. They raped people. They raped the women age 8 to 80 all the way to Berlin. They did that. And they didn't give a damn about the Russian people. These Jewish communists that took over Russia, they had machine guns. And then the officers would be Jewish communists with machine guns at the rear. The Russian people, ethnically Russian people, and other races in Russia, they would have a Mazda Nagat like I got. It holds 4 bullets at a time, and it's bolt action. So before you pull the trigger, you've got a chamber each round, each time. Each time you got to flip it up and pull it back and push it back like that, right? And you can fire one shot at a time. And if the Russians turned around or didn't go forward into the meat grinder, they were shot up by machine guns by the Jews in the back. And the Jews did not do almost any strategy. They did not care for the lives of the Russians. They just said, go forward, go forward, go forward. And the Germans would encircle small units of the Russians and kill them. And constantly outnumbered like 11-1, the Nazis would hold the line because they were using strategy. The Jews did not care about the lives of the Russians. They wanted to defeat the Nazis, but if it killed all the Russians to do it, they didn't care. They hated the Russians. They hated the Russians for the programs or whatever, where every now and then there would be a baby found. Like you hear about this Illuminati shit that goes on in Hollywood and stuff. It was going on back then too. They'll find a baby that's got like 12 or 13 holes in it and all its blood drained out of it. That was ritually murdered by some Jews, and some Russians would get mad about it, and they'd punish the Jews for it. The Jews would pool all their money together to pay for lawyers to get. The thing is, even if a Jew does something that Jews believe is bad, they want that Jew to be punished by a Jewish court, not a non-Jewish court. They do not want a Jew to be punished by a non-Jew. So they would rescue them from justice all the time. And a lot of the things that we would see as crimes, they wouldn't see as crimes. For instance, in the Talmud, it says that if a non-Jew slaps a Jew, the punishment is death. So the Jews believe that if a non-Jew slaps a Jew, he should be put to death. But what's the penalty if a Jew kills a non-Jew? There is no penalty. There's no penalty. And the Jew is not supposed to steal from another Jew. But it's not considered stealing if he steals from a non-Jew, because the Talmud says the non-Jew is the property of the Jew. We're just their property and slaves in their eyes. So what would happen is the Russians would confine the Jews to the Pale because they were woke and wise to what the Jews were about. And they said, well, at least if we keep them in the Pale, they can only steal there. They knew the Jews were going to have no qualms about killing non-Jews or stealing from them or doing fraud or all that. So they said, you can only live in this one area. And that pissed the Jews off. The Jews are like, we should be able to live everywhere in Russia. We should be able to be politicians in Russia. We should be able to be the leaders of Russia. But Russia was a Christian empire, and they were not Christians. They believed that Jesus was burning to death in hell and semen and excrement. So why would you put them, why would a Christian kingdom put a Jew in power when he knows the Jew hates Jesus? It doesn't make any sense. It doesn't make any sense for Jews to expect to be promoted as the leader in a Christian country. But that's what them entitled bastards wanted. And I call them bastards because they are bastards. You know that? Like, look in the Bible. They always trace father to son, father to son, father to son. Adam had a son, and his name was Seth. And Seth had a son, and his name was Enoch. Enoch had a son, his name was Methuselah. And it just goes on, father to son, father to son. And then rabbinical Jews are like, we trace it by the mama. Why do you think they do that? Why did it switch all of a sudden? Because they're a bunch of bastard Khazarians. That's why. They're a bunch of converts. They're not the real Israelites of the Bible to begin with. That's why they call themselves Ashkenazi. Look in the Bible. Noah has 3 sons, Ham, Shem, and Japheth. Shem is where they get the Semites from, the Semitic people. There's another son, not a Semite. His name is Japheth. Japheth's got, or Japhet, depending on, but anyway, he has a son or a grandson named Ashkenazi. And they lived in about the area where Khazaria is, or Georgia, southern Russia, like between the Caucasian Mountains and the southern Russia, like in that area there. The Ukraine and Georgia, Kazakhstan, that, West Asian area. That's where Ashkenazi is. But, now they, what does the Illuminati symbol mean? Do you know? I don't know. Like, I've heard about the Hermetic principles, and I've seen some stuff about cults, but I don't really know what the Illuminati symbol means. I think Adam Weishaupt, or I don't know how to say his last name, but he is the Jew that founded the Bavarian Illuminati. One of his agents was struck by lightning. He was a courier bringing messages, and he got struck by lightning in Bavaria. And so royal agents were able to get the letters from the Bavarian Illuminati, and they were able to see that the Bavarian Illuminati had a plan to overthrow all the Christian kings in the world and instead bring in democracy so that the money powers could take over. There are different, how we have a military, but we have a space force, we have the army, we have the air force, we have the navy, right? You have a Jewish elite that wants to conquer the world, and they have the Bavarian Illuminati, and they have the Masons, and they have the Jesuits, and they have the Zionists, and they have the neoliberals, and they have the banks, and they have the legacy media. There's different arms of the same octopus, or you know what I'm saying? So I don't know. The Illuminati, there's a lot of people who come up with all kind of conspiracies about the Illuminati that is just based in imagination or whatever. And then there's things that are factually, like, we know about the Bavarian Illuminati, the Illuminati. I'm not an expert in the Illuminati. I'm not a member of the Illuminati. I don't know what their symbols mean. I don't know what their whatever means. But I know that they are agents of the Jewish elite. I don't know if it's higher than Rothschild from the Cohen line. I don't know who is at the top or whatever. But I do know that there's Jews that are extremely way more wealthier than the normal Jewish population. They're willing to sacrifice the Jewish population to achieve their goals. And a lot of them are in that Frankish type sect where they believe that God is both good and evil. That God is both Yahweh and Satan, and they believe that to be divine, they have to do good and evil, and that it's okay for them to do evil to take over the world, because once they take over the world, they'll do good. I think it's just a cop-out to excuse evil behavior. I don't think there's no legitimacy in being evil to try to pretend like it's going to create good in the future. I don't really know. I'm not going to pretend to be an expert of the Bavarian Illuminati, but I'm going to tell you that it's an organization just like the Masons that's basically Jews give a little bit of power to non-Jews by linking them into their international connections, but it ultimately empowers and enriches the Jews more than the non-Jew, and that most of the members are useful idiots. Basically, they don't know they're being used, but they're really just being used by the Jews to achieve global domination, where the Jews do intend to enslave everybody till they get to a point to where they don't need us, and then they want to force sterilize us, and then they want to kill us. Once they can replace us with robots, and their ultimate aim is for the world to be inherited by the Jews only. But before that, they envision this age of time in where the Jews' only work is to give the law to the non-Jew, and the non-Jew does all the manual labor for the Jew. And that the Jew has a Messiah that is a political king, that is an absolute despot. See, the Jews, they promoted freedom and liberty, but they themselves don't believe in it. They talk about how they know that these ideas of freedom and liberty are silly, and they know that democracy is a bad idea, that it makes the government, it paralyzes them, they can't be decisive, every single thing gets argued. Like, right now in America, you have people in Congress where they're asking people that they're interviewing, they're saying, can you tell me the definition of a woman? You see what I'm talking about? How just ridiculous that is to be like wasting time with that shit, but it has to happen. They argue about everything. They knew it was a bad idea. They knew that the Americans would be better off under the Christian king than to revolt against the king and have democracy. They knew the liberalism trick. They knew more about human nature. They had a longer memory of analyzing generations of the rise and fall of empires. They knew more about human psychology, and they knew good and well what they were doing. They, through fraternities like the Masons and the Bavarian Illuminati, they were promising Westerners that there would be some kind of golden age and enlightenment if they would just overthrow the Christian kings. But they knew the Christian kings were in their way of obtaining power. They wouldn't be able to have the IMF today or the Federal Reserve today if we were still ruled by Christian kingdoms and states. And I'm not arguing for Christian kingdom theocracies. That's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying the Jews believe that everything is decided by force, which actually is true. It all comes down to that vibe of the threat of violence, because people, if they have a disagreement and they go, one says, I'm going to do this. Like, let's say one person says, I'm going to plant carrots in this field. And the other person says, no, I'm going to plant potatoes in this field. They can argue about it. But then when one of them's going to go do it, and it might go into a fighting about it, like you could say, eventually though, it comes to force. Everything comes to force. It comes to which army beats which army, which police will put you in prison, who can take you off your land. You know what I'm saying? Everything is decided by force. So they were saying that the best form of government, I'm not saying this is the best form of government, but they said is a despotism, an absolute king. But they had some ideas about how you would raise this king, how you would select this king. And they talked about how this king from childhood has been trained how to do his job. Whereas you can't really have that benefit electing people. And, you can't really changing people out all the time. And when you have a kingdom, the king sees the kingdom as his property. And if he can pass it to his son, he'd rather improve it and pass it down better to his son than worse to his son. Also, his pride and identity is attached to his country. So he doesn't want his country, compared to other countries, to be the poorest country or the weakest country or the most diseased country, And there's flaws in both systems. But basically, the Jews, they believed that the best system and the system they wanted for themselves was a despotic monarchy with a Sanhedrin. I'm not going to go into all the details of it, basically. But their plan wasn't for permanent democracy. It was a temporary part of the plan to overthrow all the Christian kings and to bring about all these democracies. But then they want to create inflation. They put up this pyramid scheme for all the property to go to them through the banks. And they would cause an economic meltdown in the entire world. This is the Jews' plan. They will bankrupt every single nation in the world. But then they will come and have the solution. They will have the gold standard. They can bring it back, and they control the majority of the world's gold. There's way more gold than people think there is, but the Jews keep it vaulted up because this has been it's a plan that goes back to before the Tsar of Russia fell. I don't remember the exact date of it, but they've had this plan before the Tsar of Russia fell to take over the world, and to take over the world through taking over the publishing companies and the media and the banks. And it's just like, yeah, they might have thought it looked cool, you know. There is, you see the triangle and the star of Saturn, or the star of Rephium. In the star of Saturn, you have a triangle going up and a triangle going down. And some people say one of them is masculine energy, one of them's feminine energy. And they say as above, as below, all kind of things. I don't really know what the Illuminati, mean by their triangles, and I really don't care. I wouldn't give them any money, and I wouldn't join them, and I would never sell my soul, meaning my sanity, or my values or my virtues to gain fame or money. So, I have no interest in joining either one. My granddaddy, when he had a store, the Masons wanted him to join, but he had no interest in joining the Masons because they had killed a man for revealing secrets. They had pulled his lungs through his ribs, and they hung him up under a bridge near Glenwood, Georgia. But probably the judge, the police, everybody was Masons, and nothing ever come of it, nothing in the paper, nothing, but they did. They killed that man because he told some secrets. We don't know what them secrets were. We don't know nothing about it really. But my granddaddy, his reasoning was that if someone had some secrets that evil, that they would do that to keep the secrets. They weren't no kind of people he wanted to have any part of. So, but they didn't approach him and ever ask him to join until he had a store and was making money. And he didn't join. But the first Masons is Solomon's Lodge, and all the original members were Jews. Just like Yell, Skull, and Bones. It's an awful way to go. It is an awful way to go. It is an awful way to go. But I mean, they don't want people joining their club, being spies, and telling all their nonsense. Because it's kind of set up where at each different level you gain some new knowledge. So they're kind of like selling that knowledge. And the knowledge is kind of like some Mormon stuff or some Yaqub, Nation of Islam stuff. It's some silly stuff. It's like new silly names for God, new silly rituals and all kind of stuff. It's not like they're really gaining anything of any real value, except maybe the social connections. But mostly, they're just a special kind of tax farm to funnel money up. I think I'm probably about to... We'll see what time it is. I need to check to see. It's 7:08. Okay, Brittany said she's got a ride. All right, so I guess I don't really have to stop streaming. I don't know if the same person that made the last comment is back or not, but I agree that's an awful way to go. And I think they were probably trying to copy a Viking practice when they did that. Maybe I'll shift gears and start to talk about some positive things. One, I'm not black-pilled. I don't think it's ever hopeless. Also, the things I say, the things that I'm saying now, 16 years ago, no one would listen. People were ready to stone you. And now in the comment section, all over social media, I'm very surprised, and I'm what's the word? I'm very relieved, and I feel very good how many people are starting to wake up to the lies of legacy mainstream media. Because for a while there, they were controlling the narrative, and they were hurting everybody like sheep. And you just couldn't get through to people. There was no way to tell the truth without people already being trained to see you a certain kind of way. They're to already have an immediate association with you in hatred. It wasn't fair. And actually, I was never coming from a place of hatred. I was coming from a place of love. I love my country. I love my people. I love my family. And I did not want to see happen to them what happened to the Russians during the Bolshevik Revolution. I don't want to. So I wanted to tell the people the truth. And the time that I lived in my life, I saw the history being retold, the school being changed, everything being covered up, and the Jews buying up everything and covering it up as it was happening. As I was trying to get the truth out, Google buys YouTube. They censor that. They shut that down. It's like but I do not think, this is one thing that I do not think that they planned or accounted for. I do not think when the protocols were written that they knew the internet would be invented or that they were ready for it. Now, they've damn near about bought it up and monopolized it. But the thing is, there's always like a new app. Like once they censored everybody on YouTube, there was BitChute, there was Rumble, so people have kept adapting, and the Jews have never been able to really just control the internet like they have the television. And so it's really refreshing and really gives me a lot more optimism to see people now realize who the Israelis are, what they're doing, what they're about, what they believe, what they want to do. And I was saying these things when these things were not cool. And I have a friend, Graham Phillips. He's friends with Kyle. I'm friends with Kyle. But Graham called me a gay, autistic retard for saying these things, which I'm not gay. Autistic, I don't know where I am on the spectrum of that. I'm not going to say anything to that. I don't think I am. I might be a little ADHD or something, but I don't know. Retard, I think I'm kind of like, I'm not a genius, and I'm not a retard, and I'm not average. I'm average in the kind of way that parts of my brain are genius, but then parts of them are retard. And it makes me like, I don't know what I am, I'm like, most of the time I'm just kind of like slightly below average maybe, but then in certain areas I really excel and am really good at. And but I fell for all the propaganda too. I was raised on it. I had to come out of it. And I had to go against a lot of core beliefs and a cognitive bias and a lot of things to even get to that point. My dad was in the Air Force. I was living in San Antonio, Texas, going to John Hagee's church, Cornerstone Church in San Antonio, Texas, of John Hagee. Look that man up and watch John Hagee from Cornerstone Church in San Antonio, Texas. It's all about supporting Israel. When I was in third grade and fourth grade, and that's who I was listening to. So I almost didn't have a shot. Like I was very pro-Israel. I was very Zionist. I wasn't a Jew though, but a lot of Christians in the Bible Belt even are almost raised to like almost idealize Jews. It's almost like they've replaced Jesus with Jews. It's like, and they feel like they just have to support Israel no matter what. But I wasn't an anti-Semite. I was very pro-Israel. I saw Islam as the problem, the main problem. In my mind, I thought Muslims blow stuff up and Jews build stuff. Jews made Motorola, Apple. So I didn't have any ill will toward the Jews. But I started to, I knew that inflation was a problem. And I knew that the US dollar used to be on the gold standard and it wasn't anymore. And I'm like, why isn't it? And how does the dollar work? That's where it all got started. I was like, how does this dollar work? And I learned that the way the dollar works is and I'm going to simplify the math. I know this is just as a teaching tool. I know that you can never get a house for $100, you know, but let's say that you want to buy a house and you ain't got no money. And so the house is $100 and the bank loans you $100. The bank doesn't have $100 to loan you. When you say to the bank, I promise I will pay you back $100, your word promising to pay back that 100, that is considered the money. That is what it's backed on. This then gives the bank permission, the central bank permission, to print up 100 new dollars that never existed before to represent your promise to pay back the initial 100. And then also there's the house there. So they're kind of like linking it to wealth in that sort of way, right? But then here's the trick. There's interest. And no money is made to represent the interest. So let's say the interest is 10%. Of course, it wouldn't be 10%. But let's say now you owe 110, right? Well, they've only made $100. They did not make $110. Now they're owed $110, but there's only $100. So you search around to get your 110 that you owe them. You can't find it. You foreclose. They get your house. Now that's not the way it really is, because the way it really is there's a lot of people doing it. You might get your $10 because someone else did the same deal. $100. So they say there's $200 out here. The bank is owed $220 in this case. This guy's trying to get his money. You're trying to get the money. You get up the 110. So you get to keep your house, but there's not enough for him to get it. So he loses his house. You see how it works? It's like a game of musical chairs, except there's so many chairs, so many people playing, and you don't notice it first. You don't really notice it at first. At first it works. At first the government, it needs a bunch of money so it can build a bridge or so it can go to war. It's able to just have the money loaned to it. It's working. The person doesn't have the money to start his business, but he can just go get a loan. It's working. It seems to be working. And those people that are losing, those people that are having the things foreclosed on, it's not a lot of people, so it's not really noticed. But the way the system is set up, it's inevitable that eventually everybody loses everything and the bank owns everything. Or, see, as people start to pay what's owed to the bank, if more loans aren't made, there's not enough money for trade and the economy starts to fall apart. The only way for there to be enough money circulated for trade is there has to be more owed to the bank. The whole system is set up so that the only way people can buy or sell is that they owe Jews money. And it's set up in such a way as a game of musical chairs where eventually the Jews own all the property. That's why Thomas Jefferson said that if we allowed a central bank, that their grandchildren would wake up on the continent that their forefathers conquered homeless. That's why he said that. That's why Benjamin Franklin said this was his reason for being in the revolution. He said the primary cause of the Revolutionary War was to get out from under the slavery of the European central bankers. The Continental Congress, they had made a money that wasn't linked to that, and that was the problem. The Bank of England had fallen to the Rothschilds. And why? Because they were seduced by this. The Christian king knew he shouldn't be doing this, right? But he said, if I let the Jews do this system, I can just borrow a bunch of money. I don't have to go to the lords. I don't have to go to Parliament. I can just get a loan and I can buy my ships and buy my cannons and I can be king, So that's how he was seduced into doing it. And the Jews got control of the Bank of England. Rothschild, he had set up a bank in Vienna. He had set up a bank in London, in Paris. I got it wrote down. There's the 5 first ones that he started with. But this sort of pyramid scheme of this fractional banking, I'm going back to, I forgot my story. I forgot why I said all this. Now I remember. Okay, so this is how it happened. I was pro-Israel. I supported the Jews. I looked into how this fractional reserve banking worked, and it's fraud. And at the time, I was a fundamentalist, Christian Zionist, I guess. And I read in the Bible, and in the Bible it said, dishonest scales are an abomination before the Lord. And I thought, whoa, abomination? That's what God says about homosexuality. That's what God says about shellfish. That's what God says when he's disgusted by something, when he thinks something's really bad. He says dishonest scales. Well, so, used to, they'd have gold and silver coins that had a certain amount of weight to them, and you would weigh them when you bought and sold things. And a dishonest scale would be a scale to where it would say it was heavier or lighter than what it is. And I started thinking, fractional reserve lending, this whole system of money, not being on the gold standard and doing this kind of thing, is dishonest scales. This is an abomination. So as a Christian at the time, I said, the Federal Reserve is evil and we got to get rid of it. And a lot of Christians had a lot of loans and didn't want to hear it. But as I started to tell people and warn people about, and I'm talking about when I was a 15-year-old is when I started to figure out about the Federal Reserve. When I was like 18 and 19, I'd figure out a good bit about it to where I could talk about it, and I'd overcome a lot of the shyness I used to have. And it was all I talked about, and no one cared and no one believed it. And you would tell people about the Federal Reserve, and they would say, nope, the US dollar is backed on gold. And you're like, no, it isn't. It hasn't been since Nixon. It hasn't even entirely been since the third, and people just, when someone drove by, I didn't know if I heard car speakers or Brittany like upset yelling or arguing for a second. I didn't know what I was hearing. I was smart in high school, but now I'm pretty retarded. I don't know why. I don't think you're retarded. I don't know. One positive thing is soon Christmas will be here. Yeah. Oh, I hear Brittany. She might have. Well, I'm about to get off this live. But anyway, Jews started to call me anti-Semitic because I was against the Federal Reserve. And to me, that made no sense. I'm like, I'm not anti-Semitic. And then I started to realize, oh, yeah. I'm about to put money on it and cut them on. I was just live streaming and I hadn't got around to it yet.